All right, here we are. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, John Henry Soto here, along with George Batista, and welcome to another episode of Counterparts. And this evening, we're going to be talking about the mafia. But we're gonna make it fun because I know there's a lot of information out there about it, and we're just gonna make it fun. So, come on back.
Nice.
Georgie, really gotta take care of a few things for me. You know what I mean? You come in here and you tell me about vitamin C and that I'm low on vitamin D. And I don't know why you come here and disrespect me this way. You know what I mean? What have I ever done to you? What have I ever done to you?
Godfather, just trying to keep you healthy.
And I changed my hat for that. Dude.
Oh, nice.
I got a little mob hat.
Very nice.
So, we are having a good time doing these episodes, everyone. I really hope that you enjoy, listening to our takes on some of these subjects. Our takes are always different. They're never like what you would normally find on some other stuff. They're a little out there, but we always do it with a lighthearted. This is entertainment after all.
Correct.
But we do take that seriously, and we want to everyone to enjoy it.
Yes.
So today we're going to be covering the mafia, but before we do that, here we go again.
Georgie, with his vitamins.
We say vitamins. But George, yes, please take it away, and let's do our sponsor.
Thank you, John. Today we're going to be talking about big pharma. I mean, the mafia. Anyway, but
What's the difference?
yeah, exactly. The Counterparts show is brought to you by Wellness Resources, a family-owned and operated nutritional supplement company providing the highest quality, clinically formulated supplements since 1985. Find out why Wellness Resources supplements are the top choice of health-conscious individuals around the world. Go to myvitaminresource.com to check out all the supplements that they offer. If you enter the promo code Counterparts, you will get free shipping on your order, and make sure you take advantage of their monthly specials. And this month's special is 25 to 30% off on their weight loss and leptin control pack supplements. So check it out, because there's some really, really great supplements. I highly recommend. I've been using them for about 16, 17 years now. So again, check them out at myvitaminresource.com.
Cool. And it's funny, the weight loss, because we were just talking before we came on about how there's a diabetic medicine that's now being bought up because people found out that you can lose weight on it. So now people who are diabetic and need it can't get it because people are trying to use it. This is bizarre, but that is the industry, my friends.
That is.
So, talking about the mafia.
And John is an expert in the mafia, by the way.
I'm not an expert, but I know a little bit. So I got fascinated with the mafia. And when I say the mafia, La Cosa Nostra, I say very respectfully. That's just what they call it. They call it the mob. They call it the mafia. They call it La Cosa Nostra, whatever you want to call it. Organized crime, right? But I got very interested in it because in the 80s, when I was a teenager, there was John Gotti and that whole thing happened, and with John, not just John Gotti, but it was so front page story, which up to that point it really hadn't been, because remember the mafia is and we're going to talk a little bit about this. The mafia, the origins of it, was really a protection. They were there to try to protect the communities from from the
From
government
the
and
injustices that they're from the
injustices,
government. Yeah, exactly.
and so you would rather go to a family that was there to protect you because they not only had food, but they also had weapons and they had
Mhm.
ways to really protect their communities.
Right.
So that's why La Cosa Nostra, it means our thing.
Right.
It's our. It's like they're doing their thing, but we're doing our thing. We're taking care of our family. We're taking care of ourselves, and the family is everything, right? You
Right.
die for the family. So I got interested in that during that time because of it, and as I got older with the internet and stuff, I started being able to, and I read a lot of books too. I'm kind of a nerd, but I read a lot of books, and I'm actually still reading right now Joe Bonanno's book, and he was a gentleman. I mean, the guy was like super friendly. Everyone loved him. You know what I mean? But he was like the leader of one of the hardest core mafia families of all time, and just a really, really tough guy. But we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the mafia. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the characters, some of the how it got exposed. Because up to a certain point, it was a secret society. It was something that you didn't really go around tell people because it would, for obvious reasons. And this is where I think John Gotti kind of screwed up and stuff because he was out there with his fanciness and stuff.
He was. It's it's interesting how he was on the cover of magazines. He got more press than the president at the time.
Mhm.
It is amazing how out there he was.
Yeah. I mean, John was not a the images of John. When you see him, the suave guy coming out of the car, running out of the courtroom, waving at everyone. That kind of stuff. That was his almost like his brand.
Right.
You talk about branding and stuff, and that was his brand. But when you hear interviews, and I've heard a lot of interviews of, I shouldn't say interviews. They weren't really. He didn't know the recording was on, but like undercover wire taps and stuff like that. A lot of them you can listen to on YouTube. There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
He was just a thug.
Right.
He was a hard-nosed criminal. He talked about it. He loved the life. There's one thing that if there was anything to respect the man was the fact that he lived the life. He talked it. He lived it. He died by it.
Yeah.
He never cracked. He just lived that life, and he also some of the interviews, he wanted the respect at all times from everyone. It didn't matter whether he earned it or not, and I think that was part of the downfall that he had because he let himself slip by saying a lot of things. But we're not talk a little bit about John. We're gonna go back at the beginning of the show. I showed a couple of photos. I think oh darn it.
What happened, John? Come on now.
Oh, I had this photo here, but two guys on the end. Like I know, Meyer
Lucky
Lance
Luciano. Yeah.
is in the middle. Lucky Luciano is there, and the other two guys, I can't remember their names. I have
One of them is that, if I'm correct, is that Arnold Rothstein?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
He's got an interesting story, and we should definitely get into that because I studied up on him too, and it's very interesting. But he was actually, a lot of people actually credit him for being kind of like almost the father of that modern mafia at that time.
Yeah, because he was older. He also was very well connected. Even though Lucky Luciano was the guy who said, "Let's organize this, and not kill each other."
But Lucky Luciano worked for him, though.
He worked for him, right? He was like one of the main guys. And if you go back, I mean, you can go back 18 something. What I mean? This is how long this lineage goes back as far as like the control of this Cosa Nostra thing. So, but yeah, Lucky Luciano and him really were the ones that put it in order. I mean, think about this for a second. There was a during the 60s, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Lucky Luciano was one of the guys that was called by the government to help out the troops and to try to actually create some type of peace.
That's
And
right.
it was him that did this. And this has happened in the past, by the way. This is not something new. This has happened in the past where a civilian has way more power than the government. We talked about a couple of weeks ago. We talked about Carnegie.
Mhm.
Who had more money than the government at one point, who had to
That's
lend
right.
the government some money.
Right.
And thank God now the government knows how to handle money better. But back in those days, they just didn't. Today they
Yeah.
got it all in order. So when I want to show a photo here of
Mhm.
like some of the this was 1963. This was really the what the FBI had. And the reason that this came about, because there was a thing called the commission. There was
Mhm.
all these guys, really, really, some of these guys were the notorious guys, but they were under the radar for a long time.
Right.
Up there you see Bonanno from New York City. He's the one I'm reading a book about him right now. Genovese, Giancana, who's the one that was, remember the guy was shot he had a cigar in his mouth?
Yes.
Famous
Yep.
photo.
Yep.
And so these are the guys right here. Bruno from Philadelphia, Anthony Bruno. I mean, these guys were the guys that really ran the show,
Mhm.
and it wasn't until, because up to this point, everyone had denied the mafia, right?
Yeah. J. Edgar Hoover.
J. Edgar Hoover, yeah. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover denied the mafia because
they had stuff on him.
they had
Right.
stuff on him.
They had stuff. Apparently, he was hanging out in places that were
He was in
mafia controlled, and he had a boyfriend at the time, and blah blah
that was a
blah.
big no back then.
Yeah, yeah.
And he also, I think he wore women's
He
clothing.
wore women's clothes, right?
There's no proof of that. That's just, that could be whatever. But I know the other stuff is real, because I've read enough stuff that it always pops up into different.
Yeah.
And it's just like, wow, it must be something, but it wasn't until this guy right here, Joseph Valachi, that really he broke the code. And if anybody's really interested in seeing what, you could watch a video of this. You could watch the whole thing on YouTube. I've seen it a couple of times actually. And during the whole, questioning, he's talking about the rituals. He's talking about, and he's telling the guy, he goes, you understand that me telling you all this right now, I'm dead.
Yeah.
You understand, right? I am a dead man right now. Okay. Right. I broke the code. This is like the biggest thing, and it's so dramatic that if you look at it, you think you couldn't write it any better.
Exactly.
This was this is really what happened. And that kind of opened the doors up to the FBI being able to investigate and actually put names and put people in positions of power and kind of understand now, okay, they're controlling this and they're controlling that. And, politicians, what are you going to say? I mean, you want good people to do good things. And unfortunately, power sometimes corrupts. And it could also be fear. You're afraid.
Yeah.
You're afraid. You're just afraid to go against it. It's like
that's part of the. I mean, you're right. That's the issue with it, because they, it's interesting when you really look at it, and I've done more diving into it lately, obviously, and just to kind of see what it's all about and stuff like that. It's interesting how their codes and even things of, okay, women and children are off the table. You don't mess with women and children, and there's certain things you have.
That's just the Italian mob.
Well, yeah, on the Italian side, right? But but it's interesting on that thing, how they have these certain codes, how they'll mess with this, but they will not mess with that. You can do this, but you can't do that. And again, businessmen. I mean, if you look at if you look at Rothstein, how he started, even right. He started. Now he was a little bit cracked up in the beginning, because literally he shot 2 cops in the middle of a card game.
Right.
But what was interesting is that he bought his way out of it. Right. Yeah. He bribed the juries. He bribed the prosecutors. He bribed them all, and he was able to get out. And when you do those types of things, and that word gets out in the street that you're able to do, not only you kill these cops and you get away with it, and then you're bribing, right?
Yeah.
The fear spreads, right? And that's where you start to make a name for yourself, right? At that time, especially.
Sure. I mean, it's all fear.
Yeah.
That's
Right.
the thing about the mafia, that it only operates on fear.
Right.
They say organized crime, but any organization that puts fear into its people,
Hmm.
to its, is not a good organization.
Right.
And that goes with any organization.
Yeah, of course.
That puts, and it's like that scene in the Godfather, where the guy is about to testify against against Michael, and then the guy turns around and they bring in his father. Two of Michael's guys brings in his father, and they just sit next to him in the back, and
And they're just like,
and the guy's like, yeah, I don't remember. I don't
Yeah.
remember what happened. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was drunk. I don't. But that's how they operate. It's fear.
Right.
It's just fear. And there were some good businessmen. Like Castellano wanted to be a good businessman, and he
Mhm.
wanted to be known as only a businessman. You know what I
Right.
mean? But
Yes.
unfortunately, he just couldn't, because he was just too connected. You know what I mean? It was just and he had that big house in Jersey that they called the White House, and
Right.
and they tapped the hell out of that place, so they have all his recordings as well. And and when he was well, anyway, I don't want to shy away, but go
Well,
ahead.
and I want to kind of get your thoughts on how like coming from Italy and these folks. I mean, because you've studied the history way more than I can. So obviously, even back then, like you said, it was these gangs or mobs or whatever you call them in Italy were kind of taking the side of people who were wronged by the government.
Right.
And then
Yeah. I mean, they were, they controlled local economies, right?
Mhm.
And the reason for that, Mussolini was in charge,
Right.
and of course, not the best guy, So a lot of people had to, fight to survive,
Yeah.
And what did they do? Well, these mafia, these families, got together, and they decided, okay, they're gonna take care of their families. They're gonna
Yeah.
take care of whoever has to be taken care of. And what ended up happening is that went along for a very long time. We're talking about the turn of the century,
Mhm.
1900s and stuff like that, and even before that,
Right.
So what happens is that they just then suddenly they are, things are bad, and people are coming now to America,
Mhm.
right? And so what are they going to bring to America? They're going to bring the exact same mindset.
Yes.
They're going to bring it here, and so of course here they arrived, a lot of them arrived in New York, Chicago, and
Right.
New Orleans has a big
Mhm.
mafia connection. I mean, pretty much every single sector of America has its has its place, but those are the big ones, right? Detroit has a big
Yeah.
one. Canada, there's a big in Canada also, and Florida, Miami. So a lot of when they arrived, especially in New York, they arrived to slums.
Right.
They
Mhm.
arrived to poverty.
Mhm.
It wasn't like it was. So a lot of these younger kids, like Lucky Luciano and those guys, growing up in that environment. Anastasia, he's the one that was shot in the barber chair. That's a
Yeah.
famous photo of him.
Mhm.
He was one of those. He was just crazy. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And this is what they started this at a very young age, where they would go around and give protection and
Yeah. They're
threaten
fighting to
people,
survive too. Yeah.
fighting to survive, and
Right.
it came out of that. It really wasn't until Lucky Luciano got old enough to realize that there was a better way of doing this, where we're not all just killing each other. And it goes, I guess, with Al Capone as well, because Al, I call him Al. We go way back. Al and I, when we used to hang out, well, Al Capone was one of those guys that was ruthless and everything, but he was ruthless within his world.
Yeah. Yeah.
He wasn't like, there was a time when there was shooting, a drive-by, and there was an innocent person that was there. It didn't get hit, but had to throw on the floor and so they went and they gave that guy like $1,000.
Wow.
Now $1,000 in 1920 something was like me handing you $50,000 today. You know what I mean? I mean it was a lot of money. You can live a few years with $1,000.
Right. Correct.
And
think about the height of the Depression also, right? You got the Depression going on.
Yeah, the Depression was a little bit later.
Later, but I'm saying that's during that.
By the time the Depression came on, he was already in control. So you had the Prohibition.
That's one of the things, the catalysts of that.
Yeah, and that really, Prohibition was what really made Al Capone the businessman that he became. And control of the whole. And they could not get him because, like you said earlier, they just buy people off. I mean, they had all the cops were bought, all the judges were bought.
Yes.
There was nothing you can do. It was like literally nothing you can do. So, it wasn't until of course, Elliot Ness, and we all know the story and stuff. And tax evasion was the only thing that
got him on. Yeah.
But that is a thing even today. But one of the major things we have to talk, obviously, we can't talk about the mafia without talking about Giuliani, who was a district attorney in New York City who went after the mafia and really did a number on them with the whole RICO law. Right. And that was, one of the first times where they're like, okay, even if you don't sell the drug or commit the crime, if you are controlling them, you are guilty and you're going down. That changed the whole game.
Yes.
So,
but it's interesting that back then, when you look at how, like you said, they bought off everything and they got their tentacles and everything, right? Because first it was the Prohibition thing. Okay, so now we're gonna figure out how to distribute. We're gonna figure out how to go behind the channels and do these things. It actually kind of made them a lot, and then it was. Well, we're going to control the unions, right? We're going to control the docks. We're going to control the truckers. We're going to, all that stuff. And that kind of went all the way down the line, Teamsters and all, that whole piece. Yeah. When, once you control the unions, especially if you control the top unions in the country, you're controlling pretty much everything, right? You could literally, they said you could literally stop.
You can stop
everything. You can stop the country just by doing it.
That's where I've actually, I'm from New York and I've seen walk-offs. I saw it twice in my from construction sites. Right. And it was scary because it was very violent. It was like people throwing stuff to the workers. You gotta get off. And some workers are like, I gotta eat. I gotta feed my family. I can't just walk off and not work. But you better walk off because somebody's gonna pipe you. Of course, Jimmy Hoffa, a big organizer, the biggest organizer of that era, started at Kroger, which is a popular supermarket here, and I don't know, it's everywhere, but and actually I didn't know Kroger is the oldest supermarket in the country. Yeah, it was
interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and he was a kid and he worked at Kroger and he got the staff to agree to walk out because they weren't paying them enough. And that was like where he got his feet wet, I guess, and decided on starting, to organize unions as he got older. But he had so much money and control that it was impossible for the mafia not to get their hands on it because that's where they go.
Right.
Remember, this is not money that no one else controls this. It's not like when you pay a union dues, it goes into the bank and there's records of it. No, you pay your union dues and that gets packed up and sent to Jimmy Hoffa and he has it in different places and stuff, That power is incredible. So the mafia is seeing that, it was definitely something that they had to try to figure out how to get their hands on. And they got their hands on a lot of it. It built Las Vegas.
They Las Vegas with that, right? That money.
Completely. Yeah. I mean, Las Vegas was built by, Bugsy Siegel and, all those guys, not so much Jimmy Connor, but all those guys that were back then, in New York, were able to tap into to Jimmy Hoffa, and it wasn't until Jimmy Hoffa went to jail,
Yeah.
right? And during his time in jail, he lost his position.
Yeah,
Right?
and he wanted it back when he got out.
He
That
wanted
was
it back. He
the
gave
issue.
it to his guy, which is Frank
Frank Sheeran.
Frank Sheeran. No, Frank Sheeran. No, Frank Sheeran was one of the guys with Jimmy Hoffa, but it wasn't. It was Frank. It's another Frank, but I can't remember his last name now. I'll get it in a second. It's in the book. I heard you paint houses. I heard you paint houses.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I know Frank Sheeran was one of the guys that Hoffa trusted.
Yes, Frank Sheeran wrote the book. He's
Right.
the one that actually wrote. Well, he with somebody. Now the book has been sort of. There's a lot of not truth in there. Frank Sheeran was one of these guys who wanted the fame, and he was broke at the end of his life and had to figure out a way to leave some money for his family. So he wrote this book.
Is that why he said on his deathbed that he killed Jimmy Hoffa?
Correct.
Okay.
That he was one of the ones that killed Jimmy Hoffa, and that's what's in the book.
Okay.
Now, people that are in the mob that were there know that did not happen.
Like Michael Francisi.
Yeah. Well, he definitely says that, that didn't happen because he knows he knew that the life. But there's a ton of other people that that also talk about that as well. Fitzgerald, Fitzpatrick, something like that. Fritz, they call him Fritz for sure.
Fritz, yes, Fritz, yeah.
And so he's the one that took over. And then when Jimmy got out, he wanted to get his union back. But obviously they didn't want to give him his union back, and that became a problem because then he went on the air and he talked about the mafia.
Right,
he talked
that
about
was the mistake.
Taking your money and all that stuff, and that was like a big mistake. And there was a lot of talk with Frank Sheeran and with different people saying that he can't talk like that, and and a lot of those guys that were in back then were smart enough to know that if they can orchestrate getting rid of Jimmy Hoffa, one of the most famous people on earth, he was more famous than the president at one point, that they can keep it quiet because their backgrounds with La Cosa Nostra is so secretive.
Right.
They'll take it to their graves knowing they won't,
Right.
But unfortunately, they're now in New York.
Yeah.
And New York had a lot of, freedom. Freedom is great, right? We all want to be free. We all love America, the land of the free, but it also does certain things where people now that have that kind of freedom, they can go other places. They have other opportunities. So they can say whatever they want. And if they just don't go back there, they just don't go back there.
Right.
People got out of them. People say, "Oh, you can never leave the mob." You could leave the mob. You know what I mean? You could if you're like not an earner, and if you don't know anything, if you're like some dummy,
low level guy. Yeah.
A perfect example is Johnny Brasco, right? In that film, that film was a true story, right? And the guy that was undercover, he was there for 6 years, so he knew what a low level guy was. You know what I mean? It's like these guys were low-level guys, and they operate barely surviving, and that's why a lot of the mob is like that. A lot of those lower levels, the soldiers and those guys, you don't start making any money until you're like a captain, and if you get made, then you get some money because you may get, they may say, you know what, you get made, right, and you go through the whole thing. Once you're made, you can't be touched.
Right.
You can't be touched by anyone. But of course, that's where John Gotti also screwed up because he orchestrated the Paul Castellano hit. And that just did him in, because you do not. I mean, the head of a family, it's like, and then the next day he's on video.
Yeah, he's all
everyone and hugging, and like because he's the new guy now.
Right.
And sort of like, well, you're done. But surprisingly, he didn't get killed.
I know, right? You would think
about that. Yeah,
you would.
Yeah, I think they kind of were like, you know what, let him. He's probably going to do himself in, or maybe they just didn't get an opportunity. He was really well protected. He was paranoid.
Yeah,
he was paranoid. So, But yeah,
You know, speaking of making money, there's one of those facts that a lot of people don't know about what's his name? No, why is his name Chicago?
Al Capone.
Al Capone. He was making $1 billion,
Right.
and that's by today's
Yeah.
standards. He was
Yeah.
making $1 billion by today's standards.
People don't realize how rich these guys were.
Jesus,
You know, I mean, they
I
don't
was like,
realize that, you know, when you have that kind of money, that's Elon Musk money back in the
yes,
20s,
yeah, exactly.
which is like, might as well say you're a trillionaire,
Yeah,
you know?
incredible.
Yeah. So yeah, it was just an incredible thing. And that's where the power lies, you know.
Exactly.
The overall take on almost every single thing that I see, you know, is that, and you know, like Michael Francine, right? He was in it, you know what I mean? He was an earner. He was a high earner. He did a lot. He did something with the gas.
Yep.
The gas stuff and he did a lot of stuff. But he didn't. This is my personal opinion. He didn't kill anybody. Like, he never says he did it. He didn't. He knows about stuff and he knows about people. But he himself, I know, didn't. I just don't feel like he didn't have to. He was making so much money for the guys up above. And he was always giving them money. He was always giving them their cut. See, that's the thing about the mob. You know, if you go out and you do a score, right? Let's say I make $10,000 doing a score, right? And I go and I take the $10,000 and I go to my house and that's it. And I'm done. I just made $10,000. And they find out that you did that without coming in and reporting some of the money. You're done.
Yeah,
you're done. You get called in, and you may get a warning if you've been a high earner. If not, then you're just done. You're you know, they'll take care of you. So what you do is you hurry back. That was like the expression. You know, you go do the job and you hurry back. And when you hurry back, whatever you got, you give the cut to the boss. The boss gets whatever the boss says he wants. He wants 50%. He wants 60%. He wants it all.
Right.
I need all of it. Sorry, you get the next one. Yes, sir. You got it. And that's just the way it was, you know.
Yeah.
And if you had a boss that was a psychopath, which a sociopath, which plenty of them are, you know, like Tony Spilantro, you know, was a sociopath. You know, he's the one that, I don't know if you saw Casino.
Oh yeah.
So Joe Pesci played him in the Casino, you know, a real mental dude. And there's footage of him in real life talking and stuff like that, and just really a sociopath, you know. Never thought he did anything wrong. But if you get a guy like that that's running the crew and taking all the money, then there's a lot of resentment, you know. And this is what happened with Paul Castellano. Paul Castellano was taking all the money. He was taking like a lot of the money from the capos and all those guys, and they were like, "What the hell? This guy's freaking taking." So when it came down to, like, you know, the conversations about Paul doing this and Paul doing that, and, you know, I don't know, I don't like, he's not being fair. We're making all this money for him, and he's got this mansion called the White House. We're not getting anything. He's got servants and he's got all this stuff, and it's like, it's not fair. So when he was taken out, I think it's part of the reason why John Gotti did not get taken out himself, because he knew that John Gotti was going to give people their money.
Right.
Well,
that makes sense.
You know, he wasn't going to just keep the money. He was going to give them some of their cut, you know. So they were like, we're not saying anything. Sorry, Paul is out, John is in, and that's good for us. We're going to be making some cash now, finally, you know.
Sure.
I think that was part of the, you know, part of the issue.
Interesting. There was an interesting story that I didn't know that so going back for a second, talking about Arnold Rothstein and how influential he was the one who orchestrated the whole Black Sox scandal in baseball.
Oh yeah.
if you remember that. And
Oh
I
sure.
didn't know that he,
Sure.
and just the quick as the story goes,
There's
that
a lot of
these,
sports stuff. Boxing
yeah,
was
well,
like
he got, I mean,
crazy.
he got very interested in what the first one he kind of singled out was baseball, because these players were making nothing, because at the
Yeah.
time Comiskey, who owned the White Sox, wasn't paying them anything.
Right.
So he went to them and said, you throw the game, or you throw the World Series,
Right.
and you'll get this. Now, what was interesting, he was never, as part of his story, he was never into the threatening part of it up until one of the pitchers said, okay, you know what? I'm kind of out of this.
Yeah.
And he started to actually change it and say, I'm going to pitch my butt off.
Odd man.
And he sent the guy after him, literally, while the guy was with his girlfriend. The guy put a gun to his head and said, you better abide by the
No
contract.
strikes.
Yeah. And then the
Just
funny thing is that
balls.
they end up throwing the World Series so badly that it was at a huge investigation.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they trace it back to Rothstein. He gets indicted, pays everyone off, the juries, pays everyone off, and gets away.
Yeah. Well, you have to also understand that baseball was not what baseball is today. Baseball didn't make
course.
trillions of dollars.
No, these guys were working. These guys had regular jobs.
And the World Series, yeah, exactly. They had regular jobs.
Yeah.
They had regular jobs. I remember when my grandma, she was when the Mets won the World Series in whatever that big game,
86.
And I fell into the whole thing. At that point,
I did too. Yeah.
Loving the Mets, because I was like, oh my God, this is incredible.
Yeah.
So I was watching the game. I remember in front of the TV on my knees and stuff, and watching and screaming, and oh my God, it was amazing. So the next day, my grandma was like, what happened last night? And I was like, oh, just the Mets, they won the World Series, last night. Oh no, they didn't win. That was like game 6 or something.
Oh,
they were just about to lose, but they won,
Yeah.
And so she's like, oh, she was also, and then they did win the World Series, and I was like, yeah, and they won today. And so she's like, oh, what are they gonna do now for work? They're gonna have to go. They're gonna have to find something to do. I could not. She was so sincere and so cute about it. I was like, Grandma. I was like, no, these guys are. I mean, 86. They're very, very wealthy.
Yeah, they're definitely making money at that time.
Yeah, because I think Reggie Jackson was like the first guy to make like $1 million or something. I believe he was one of the first to be.
I don't know if was it Reggie or was it Dave Winfield? I
thought it was Reggie.
Maybe I don't know. I think it's one of those guys. I'm not sure which one, but
I think Dave Winfield came much later. I mean, Dave.
Well, he
didn't play.
But I remember. I mean, I know the contracts were those $1 million contracts were later, obviously.
Were later, yeah. That's true. That's true. But yeah, it was a funny.
That's interesting. Thing. But I just thought that was. I didn't know that he was the one involved that actually orchestrated that whole thing.
Well, boxing was a big deal also,
and
getting these guys to take dives and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was just really, it's a real, again, it's something that they can get in and use fear,
right?
Again, to try to manipulate that system to try to benefit from it, and that's just what they did. It's just what they did.
One of the things that they asked Michael Franzese about was, do you think? Because obviously a lot of the guys now that he knows are dead or in jail.
Yeah.
And, is there still this underworld of that going on that you're not seeing? And he said, yes. He said he still definitely thinks.
It totally is. I have, again, I'm kind of a dork, but I belong to like sites that actually we get updates, and like, I think like 6 months ago, one of the big guys got arrested for something. Yeah, I mean, like not that long ago, for racketeering. So it's still happening. It's still happening. It's just a little bit more covered up. It's harder now. I think Michael, I saw one of his talks. It's just harder now to do things. It's not as it is. There's a lot of social media. There's a lot of cameras around. Everybody has a camera.
Yes.
Everybody has a recording device. There's a lot of also surveillance cameras on pretty much every business that you can go around. There's surveillance, everywhere. So it makes it harder for the soldiers, right, and for the lower capos to go out
to do their
and
work.
do
Yeah.
things,
Mhm.
So they got to figure out other ways of doing stuff, and some of
And
them
that's
do it.
what's
Yeah,
and that's what's scary, because they were talking about what the different kind of mafias or organized crime that is around now. A lot of it is coming out of Mexico. There's a lot of Mexican, but these guys are like the ruthless guys. There's no
yeah, no,
code.
they'll kill the whole family.
They will kill your family. They will kill, and
Yeah.
they are heavily involved now in cyberspace and
Yeah.
cyber crime and stealing identities and wiping people out that way. And they're saying that a lot of that, I mean, they're really heavily involved in that type of stuff now, because just like you said, I think, and it makes sense that it's a lot harder to do things the way it used to be, because there's so much people can see everything now.
Right.
Yeah. So you figure you kind of do it the back way through,
Yeah,
the internet and do the cyber stuff and all that.
Yeah. And they are ruthless, and there is still a big drug cartel in the,
Yes.
Out of Colombia and and Mexico, and there's a lot of the border being now opened and all this stuff going on. There's no protection there. People are just coming in with whatever they have, and even if they have, they're not even being tested for COVID anymore. So it's like,
right.
So it's like that went away. So nobody even cares anymore about that. So there's a lot of that going on, and that is controlled by the mafia. But at the same time, there's also, I always think about this. I always think about how there's a much bigger group of people, like they look at the mafia like just a bunch of families that just want to, they're in the, in the garment district, and they're operating their trucks, and that's cute, but there's somebody moving strings up above that we don't know their name, we don't know who they are, we don't know where they live, and that's where it gets a little bit more scary and more sinister to know that that's really what's happening. I look at the mafia sometimes, or as like when I talk about this thing, as storytelling, and I know that there's a little bit of a controversy with that also, or at least people frown upon it because, like Martin Scorsese, right, one of my favorite directors of all time, and of course Coppola, they sort of glamorized a little bit of the mafia, and it seemed like a cool thing, I mean, even the Goodfellas started with that, right?
Right.
Ever since I was a boy, I've always wanted to be in them. Ever since I, that's how it starts. And so it glamorizes it to the point where it maybe desensitizes it to people, where it's just a thing that doesn't really matter. But it does matter. They're still out there, and they're still doing corrupt things, and unfortunately, some of the political figures, and that's been going on. It's not a new thing. That's been going on for years. They are also involved in as well, and protect. They protect it, and part of the reason is because there's a lot of money involved.
That's the bottom line, isn't it?
There's a lot of money involved. It's like someone. I was talking to somebody. I can't remember who it was, but I was talking to somebody, and they were saying why something wasn't like a cure for cancer, for instance, right? Like there've been, and I'm not saying that there is, because I'm not a doctor, so please check with your doctor. But there've been like
that the mafia will come after you.
right. But there's a lot of conversations about that. Like the mafia has no interest in cancer.
Right.
There's no money. They can't make money off of cancer.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's no, the research and whatever is going on, but you can't get. You know how much money there is? Do you know how much money there is in diabetes?
Of course.
In heart disease? If you got rid of heart disease and diabetes, you know how many billions and billions of dollars would be lost by individuals that work in that industry? So it is a trap. It is a trap. So when you talk about the mafia controlling the trucks and maybe they're, listen, truckers are tough guys. If they were being ripped off, they probably would give their lives and fight. They're
Right.
not being ripped off. They're being paid.
Right.
There's a union. They're paying their union dues. They're being protected. They're retiring. They're driving their trucks across country, delivering the goods for this country. And, they seem to be happy. Yes, there will be picketing here, and there'll be, people going on strike here and there and stuff like that. But overall, the system runs. I was driving around today. I saw a lot of trucks delivering stuff to Kroger. I saw trucks delivering, gas or whatever they're doing, right? So how can you get rid of them if they're corrupt from above? If they have their fingers, and all this right here is legitimate business, but here's this one thing that they're doing that's illegal. Well, we're going to just not forget. We're going to forget that one illegal thing, because these four up here run the country.
Right.
You know what I mean? Run the country. So resolving this is really the only way to resolve this, in my opinion, is through education of children.
Yes.
Educating children on really educating children and teens, and teaching them about finance and how to make money and how to balance a book. People graduate from college not knowing jack.
Well, it's interesting, because, and you're absolutely right. It's like we talk about it before. You and I have talked about this. What are the two greatest motivators, right? The fear and the greed, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can pretty much get anybody to do anything if you really tap into those two, right? And when you look at cancer, when you look at the mafia, when you look at it's all
Money.
the same thing.
Yeah.
It's all the same thing. You just look at it in different industries, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
You're putting out this fear of whatever it is and at the end of that fear thing is the money.
Or you're manipulating the fear.
You're manipulating the fear.
What really you should be afraid of.
Correct. But at the end of the day, it's the trail of money. You follow it, and here it is. Here's the money. I mean, why would you not do that? Because really, at the end of the day, when you look again, you could look back at the mafia, you could look at things that go on today. It's still the greatest model in making money that way. You know what I'm saying? It's a brilliant model, because if I put enough fear into somebody, I can make people do anything, and therefore I can collect and do well.
This is why our food is so poisoned.
Yes.
Because people don't have our conversations always go to the same thing. We could talk about
it is all related. No, it's really all related.
No, it does. I mean, most of that is why it's called Counterparts, right?
Exactly.
Because it is the same.
Yes.
It's very similar. It kind of does relate to that, because you look at fear in one of the major companies that approves food that we can eat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And approves medicine and stuff like that. And then you look at the Food Trade Commission, and then you look at of course, we talk about, and we can talk about these things because people talk about them now. There's no secret that the pharmaceutical companies are publicly traded, and they're companies just like any other company. How does Nike make more money this year than they did last year?
Right.
Well, they sold more shoes.
Of course.
So if you're publicly traded and you have people buying your stock, the only way you can please them, and you have a board, is to sell more of whatever it is. Right. A publicly traded company interest is only to sell more of whatever product they have. That would be pharmaceutical. That would be any of those things. So all the brands that we see on the shelves, where they have all the horrible sugar at child view or my view,
Mm-hmm.
at eye view for kids to see it. All that stuff is manipulated, just like the mafia manipulates those systems. But the mafia, the reason they say it's organized is because they only infiltrate the ones that they know that they can actually succeed in, that they can organize the way that they have to. There has to be somebody smart enough to know. He goes, hey, you know what? You sell those at 10 cents a share. Okay, so we're going to raise that to 12 cents, and you're going to give me the 2 cents at the end of the week. Okay. And he goes, yeah, but that's a little expensive. Well, that's what we're doing. He goes,
that's what Michael Francesi did with the gas.
Right, exactly. But he didn't go, or maybe he did. I don't know. He had a lot of influence You know what
Yes.
I mean? And when the guy, if you look at pictures of Michael when he was out there, he's an intimidating looking guy. He
Yeah.
had the
Yeah.
shades,
Yeah.
extremely
Yeah.
good looking dude. He had
Mhm.
the fancy shirt, you know. So
Right.
you know, he was pretty intimidating.
Right.
But you know, you increase the price, and then the guy's like, but you know, that guy over there charges less. He goes, all right, I'll take care of that guy. And you go over there to that guy. You say you're gonna go up to 12 too.
Yeah.
You're gonna
Yeah.
give me a two. So now you have all the competition. So somebody had to think and come up with a way, and that's extortion, right? And that's like the
Right.
most popular thing that
Mhm.
mafia people get caught for is extortion, because people say like, oh, you know, the hits in the mafia. So and then it's really, I mean, yes, there are some high profile ones,
Mhm.
but you can count them on your hands how many really high profile ones that we saw. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
The last real high profile one was Paul Castellano,
Mhm. Mhm.
and that was in the 80s. And
Yeah.
there's been a couple of other ones which if you know about the mafia, were pretty big high profile, but not television wise. Like the
Right.
television didn't really eat it up as much, you know.
Right.
So that is the way that they do it, and they don't necessarily. It's a very boring life.
Mhm.
You know, it's a very boring life. Every day is not, you know, shoot them up and get them up and tough and hey man, you know, shaking people down. No, a lot of times you go to the club, you know, some social club that they hang out at. You hang out, you play some checkers, you get your food, and you go back home.
Right.
That's really the job. You know,
Yeah.
that's what they do. And you know, the women are home 90% of the time. The women are home with the kids, and you know, Gino comes home at 9:30, gets ready for bed, and does it again the next day with his wearing his jumper.
I wanted to ask you, what did you saw that film about the making of The Godfather?
Yes,
Okay, what did you think about that?
I loved it. I mean, first of all, I've seen a lot of that, and I knew a lot of it also because I read a couple of books, and I've seen also a lot of interviews with Coppola as well.
Right.
Yeah, I love the insight stuff and behind it. You know, that was a film that wasn't supposed to be made.
Right.
The
Right.
mob was the mafia was very upset about it. You know, the book was pretty much a tell-all book,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
you know, they just didn't use the names and stuff. But you know, and Francis had to actually go to one of the head of the families to sit down with him and tell him how he was, you know, he wanted to do this film, and they were like,
Amazing.
"You're not gonna do it. You know, you're not doing this." And he kind of talked them, he sweet talked them into it because you know, Francis Ford Coppola is a genius. Let me
Mhm.
just say that
Yeah.
first and foremost. He is a genius. And I don't mean a genius filmmaker. He is a genius filmmaker, but he's a genius producer. He's
Right.
a genius mind of how to maybe maybe manipulate a situation in a way to make sure that he gets the product that he needs to put up on the screen.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I mean, that was a big deal, you know. And The Godfather was the most impossible film for him to make. The fact
Right.
that he did it and he did another one right afterwards, and they were both like incredible films, is like, and it just shows his genius because he was not supposed to make it. They said, okay, the only way you can make this film is if you use my guys. The mafia guy told him,
Yeah. Hey, that there
use
was
my
guys in
guys.
there.
And
Yeah.
so a lot
Right.
of the guys that you see in a lot of these scenes were legitimate guys in the life, you know,
Right.
living that life. And you know, I've told you before the scene of when the guy he's going in and he's rehearsing his lines to speak to the Don, right? And he's like
Yeah.
all nervous and stuff, and he's outside. Well, Francis Ford Coppola, again, the genius that he is, faced the camera and he said, film him while he's rehearsing his lines. It was really one of the mob guys just rehearsing his lines that he was going to deliver at the next scene.
It's
He's
amazing.
not acting, he's really rehearsing. That's why it looked so incredibly real. You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
and you know, it was incredible. And he went in and he's like, Don Corleone, I am so happy. Thank you so much. You know, please accept this gift, you know. And you know, it was a Godfather, you know, you
Yeah.
call it Godfather, you know. And so that was part of the glamorizing of it, you know, which I understand some people don't like that, but the film is just so well done. It's such a painting, an incredible painting. And you know, people will say, "Oh, it's such a cliche to think that that movie was." No, that movie was good because it was good. You
Yeah.
know, that movie was
Yeah.
good because it was good. You know, Citizen Kane is a good film because it was a really good film. It was shot incredible, and not because it's a cliche and oh yeah, well of course you would think that because you're a film guy and everybody thinks that that's. But no, it was a good film, dumbass. And The Godfather is a great film. And another thing about The Godfather that I don't know if you know, but when he you know, they didn't want Marlon Brando. I don't know if you saw the documentary, but you know, they did not want Marlon Brando
I did hear that. I
to
did.
do
Hear
it.
that, yeah.
They said no, he's too high risk. He's
Right.
insane. He's not stable. So
Mm.
they said if the only way we would do it is if he puts up $1 million bond. He puts up $1 million bond and he does it for free.
Wow.
And he does it for free. And they said, and we don't want him. So they were trying to get him. So Coppola, again, I'll say it again, the genius that he is, goes with a little crew, a little film crew, to go see Brando. And so he goes to his house and stuff, and Brando comes down. You know, he wore these kimonos.
Yeah.
So he had his kimono. He had this long blonde hair. Right? This long blonde hair.
Like when he was a Superman or something.
Yeah. He comes. Yeah. He comes down and stuff, and he's like, "Hey, Francis, what are you doing now?" And he says, "Sit down." You know, so they start. So he says, "Look, you know, I really think you'd be great for this. You know," and he's like, "Yeah, you know." So they're reading kind of lines and going back and forth, and meanwhile, he's filming him during this whole thing. So Marlon goes and he grabs shoe polish, black shoe polish. And he takes it and he puts his hair in a ponytail and combs it, ties it all the way back, and he puts shoe polish all on his hair, and he darkens his hair black, and he combs it really black. Then he takes 2 pieces of cotton ball, and he sticks it in his mouth. And Francis is like, "Why are you doing that?" He goes, "Well, in the book, he was shot in the throat when he was younger.
Yeah,
he would have he would talk a little more like this because his vocal cords were damaged." And he put the cotton ball in his mouth, and he says, and he has some swelling always. And he started going. And he said, and Francis said he wasn't even saying words. He was just walking around going. And Francis was like blown away by it because he's like, that's the guy. You know, I don't know. Wow. I never saw him before, but that's the guy. So he took it back. He goes to the network, to the studio, and he says, you know, I want you to see this thing. I really want Brando for this role. And they're like, no way. So he puts on the video. He says, just watch this. You know, he's like, he's looking at it with long blonde hair. It's like, there's no way, you know. And then the guy's like, oh my God. He's like, oh, we need to have him for this. He needs to do it. And he did it. He didn't even put up the $1 million bond and stuff like that. I think he did it for, I want to say like $100,000 he got paid for that.
Wow.
For that. Yeah, that was it. And of course, famously also, Al Pacino was supposed to be, you know, fired basically. You know, after the first couple of scenes, you know, they did not like him. They were like, he's got no personality. He's got no energy, you know. And Al was always said, well, he came back from the military. He's more of a relaxed guy. He's not in the life.
Right.
Why would he be so energetic coming back? He's more docile, you know.
Exactly.
And so that's how he was playing it, you know. And it wasn't until the scene, the restaurant scene, where he shot the cop, right? And it wasn't until that scene that they said, we love Al Pacino, you know. But up to that point, every day they wanted him off set. They wanted him fired. And again, Francis Ford Coppola said, no, this kid is gonna be famous. This kid is gonna be something, and this role is gonna be incredible for him. And you know, and of course, you see, if you really get into these films, and yeah, I know they're long films and they can be slow at times, but you know, when you really watch these films, you see Al Pacino developing and when he becomes the Don, and when he really, you know, and then the relationship between him and Fredo, you know, that whole thing, you know, Fredo is the older brother, you know, and he's frustrated by that, the fact that Michael is controlling everything, you know. But Michael loved his dad, man. Michael did everything to protect his dad, you know, and that was like, to me, a great piece of art. Goodfellas. I know we're gonna probably go over here, but it's just us and all of y'all, of course. But we appreciate anybody hanging out with us here. Goodfellas, another great film by the perspective of
Yes.
Henry Hill. Henry
Henry
Hill
Hill. Yep.
lived that life, and
Mhm.
saw a lot of things, and was also a big mess. Was in
Yeah.
the he put a lot of guys behind bars. He was never killed. Somehow he was just never they never took care of him. I think part of the reason was because most of the guys that would want to were away, were gone, where
Yeah.
they were either in jail or they were dead.
Right.
And then anybody that was still alive that could like avenge his friend is like, I'm not gonna take a risk killing this guy and then me going to jail. He never
Mhm.
did anything to me. That's on them. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And this was the loyalty that was being lost during the whole 60s and 70s and 80s, where the loyalty was out the window. And so that was part of and Goodfellas is another great film. Casino is a good film. I think Casino came a little too soon after Goodfellas.
Mhm.
People kind of saw it like it's the same movie, but it's not the same movie. I mean, they're completely different films.
Mhm.
But I can understand Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro.
Right.
Joe Pesci, Robert De Niro. Same kind of thing. And of course, The Irishman. I still think Irishman is going to go down in history as one of those classic films that people talk about. It is 3 hours and it is phenomenal, like just phenomenal. I loved it. Wow, that's a lot of mafia talk.
And we're still alive.
Yeah, right. Well, these are also great stories within there.
Yes.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
the thing about it. It's storytelling. In a world that people really are not that. People don't live that life.
Exactly.
So, but within that life, I think The Sopranos was a big eye opener because it took there were a lot of stories in The Sopranos that were taken from real life things, and they were basically because a guy who lived the life, and he would come in and he goes, I don't know, something that maybe you could use. This happened to a friend of mine.
Mhm. Mhm.
A
Yeah.
friend of mine happened to,
Yeah.
and you can clearly say it was him. But they always said, this happened to a friend. They took a lot of those storylines.
One of the things I liked about The Sopranos, and that and again, not that I knew a lot about that stuff, but again, you look at when you talked about the cliche of the mafia and how they portrayed them and stuff like that. The Sopranos kind of brought it down
The
to
reality.
a very realistic portrayal,
Yeah.
where you weren't looking at it like The Godfather, you weren't looking at it like Casino or anything like that. It was a guy at home with his wife and his kids,
Yeah, struggling
and
with
the
the same thing that
struggling,
everybody else struggles.
exactly, and the emotions of trying to balance that life with a family life and what happens and all that. I think that's what really made that really good, was that you really got to see a side of it that you didn't think about. That, yeah, these guys, a lot of these guys were family guys, and they had
That's
a
what I'm saying. Yeah.
very interesting.
And when you read the books too, there's a lot of stories in there just about family life, and
Yeah.
how I didn't want my kids getting involved,
Right.
in that life. Bronx Tale, right, is a with Palmieri,
Mhm.
is a very perfect example of that.
Right.
And Chaz actually didn't, when he had the script, he brought it to De Niro, and De Niro was supposed to play his character.
Yeah, I did hear that.
And he was like, no, he's like, I want to play that character, and I want you to play the dad. But De Niro was like, no. So then they were gonna, it was off the table, and then De Niro was like, all right, fine.
Little story about that. I used to work back at that time. This was before they even filmed it, when they were actually auditioning for it.
Wow.
I worked at it was on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, and it was a place, and it was like a playhouse, and on the top floor was where we used
Avenue
to.
is a big
Oh yeah,
location.
I worked at the top floor. We used to do billing. This was like one of my first jobs, and we used to do billing, medical billing. And well, lo and behold, downstairs they were doing the actual part of the auditions for the movie.
Wow, that's cool.
And Chaz, comes up
Oh, really?
into our thing, because they didn't have a copy machine. And he asked, "Hey, can I borrow your copy machine? I just need the copies." "Yeah, sure." And I'm like, who's that guy? And then one of the people that works with me who knew I really didn't know him, she was like, that's Chaz Palminteri. She's like, you know, he's in there. I was like, oh, okay. And then that's when I started to hear about. And the funny thing is that my one of the guys I worked with at the time, Italian guy, ponytail, slicked back, everything. He was one of the guys. He auditioned.
Oh, nice.
He had no acting experience, but he auditioned. He just wanted to go, and he
Yeah,
actually auditioned for the role. But that was just, I just thought that was interesting that he was actually doing all
Wow.
that right there. And I was like, wow,
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you remember, this is going back when we were kids, Joe and Joe's.
Joe and Joe's.
I mean, Joe and Joe's was a place. It was on the corner of Castle Hill and
Avenue and the Bronx
Bronx.
River. No, yeah,
Cross-
Bronx River.
Bronx River. I thought it was across Bronx.
No, Bronx River.
Bronx River.
It is Bronx River.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
so,
I'm sorry. It's the Bronx River Expressway.
I know it's been a long time. I don't remember.
Yeah, the Cross Bronx goes to the George Washington Bridge.
Yeah, but it wasn't the Cross Bronx. Like
even
on
though it
one
did turn
side-
into the Bronx River.
Oh wait, Bruckner Boulevard.
Bruckner Boulevard. Thank
Bruckner
you.
Boulevard, that's what
And
it was.
I lived right next to Bruckner Boulevard.
Right, Bruckner Boulevard.
That's what it was,
Because on
Bruckner
one side
Boulevard.
of Bruckner Boulevard was Joe's Pizza, or not Joe's, Sal's,
Sal's Pizza.
and then the other side was Joe and Joe's.
Joe's.
So
Yes.
Joe and Joe's had the best meatball sandwiches anywhere.
Yes.
Very, very Italian place. And me and George would walk in there to get our order because we had to pick up, and the bar would be lined with guys.
Yeah,
that we
and
should
they'd all turn around.
they all turn around and just stare at us.
We're
We'd be
like,
like, just here to pick up some meatball sandwiches, sir. Please, no one shoot.
yeah.
Oh,
How many times did I walk in there? My mother sent me there to get my my chicken parm sandwich or my meatball sandwich. Holy cow!
Those were good days. I mean, we had in I tell the story sometimes. Rayo's. I don't know if you heard of Rayo's. Rayo's is like an extremely exclusive Italian restaurant in East Harlem.
Okay.
They only have, I think, like 7 or 8 tables, and reservations could be a year. And their clientele is like Madonna, Prince, Michael Jackson, Sting. Those are the ones that go there, and other famous rich people and stuff like that. So I moved to East Harlem with my wife when we first got together, and we're walking by. You know, we're taking a walk around East Harlem and stuff, and I see a restaurant. I say, "Hey, Rayo's Italian. Let's get a menu." And so I walk in and I jiggle the door, but it was locked. But then it opened, and this big guy comes out. He's like, "Can I help you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I was just going to get a menu." And guy laughs, and he goes, "No, we don't have menus here." And he goes, "Oh, so then I was like, "Oh, okay. Do you come? Can you come in? When are you open?" He goes, "Well, no, you have to make a reservation." I was like, "Oh, okay." He said, "How long?" No, then I said, "Can you make a reservation?" And he said, "Well, it's about a year. It'll be about a year before you can get in." And I was like, "Oh," I was like, "Wow." I was like, "All right, well, food must be really great." And he goes, "It is, trust me." And I was like, all right, well, thank you very much. So we walked away. And this was right at the beginning of, not the beginning, but I guess the internet was kind of was out, you know, and it was already, I guess we got together in 2001, 2002. So it was around that time. So I decided, I was like, man, what the hell's up with this restaurant? So I went on the Google and I researched Rayo's, and it was the spot. It was a big mob, about 5 different people would shot like around there. Like there was all these stories of people being shot. It was a big mob area.
Wow.
And the same place in Patsy's, which is also on East Harlem. And we would get, when I lived with Kat, we would go to Patsy's, and she loved the pizza there. So we would always go get pizza there. And right next door, there was this restaurant. And this restaurant was always black. There was no curtains on the window. It was just dark. Like it just had black, like a black sheet, you know, but it was a long restaurant with a green framing. And then right next to it, just a tiny little pizza shop.
Okay.
You know, and I was just like, so then one day I walked in and I was like, dude, because it said Patsy's restaurant and then Patsy's Pizza. So I asked, I was like, can we go, when can we eat there? I'm always getting in trouble. I'm like, can we eat there? You know, is there like he goes, no, you can't go there. That part is closed off. I was like, oh, and I was like, but is it a restaurant? And it was like, the guy's like just looking at me like, He's like, he goes, it's just closed off. We don't open it. You want it, you can order it here. And then I picked it up.
Uh,
I picked up and I was like,
this little guy is asking too many
let,
questions.
let me shut up. I was like, but can I just have like a birthday party? Do you
want
do
a birthday
rentals?
party?
Do you do rentals? I was like, yeah, we do rentals. Come in the back. I'm going to show you our price list. All right, cat, wait right here. I'll be right back.
Boy, John hasn't been back in hours.
Yeah, what happened to John? I probably should have waited, but he took too long. Anyway,
Oh, good stuff.
well, yeah, it's one of those conversations. I didn't show this picture, and I don't know if anybody's still watching. It's Al
Ooh,
Capone there hanging out
wow,
in
look at him.
his prisons, believe it or not. He's in prison here.
Look at that.
Now, that changed after he got convicted, but initially when he was being held, he was in this luxurious prison. And then afterwards, when he went to a real prison, they got him. So, all right, folks, we want to thank you. Are we still live? All right, are we still recording?
I think it's Wednesday now.
Yeah. Well, thank y'all all for being on here, and appreciate y'all very much. And we will see you all again next week. We will be back. We are live, right? Yeah, live next week again. And I don't know what subject Georgia and I are gonna talk about, what we want to talk about, but we are going to be having guests again in the future. We have some really great people coming up, and
Some mafia guys.
yeah, we got some mob guys coming up. You're asking a lot of questions about Patsy's, John. Pissing people off downtown. Oh man, I had so many stories that I didn't mention. But anyway, we will probably do another episode at some point. If anybody's interested or likes this kind of conversation and you want to be involved in this, let me know. We'll have you on. You actually talk. If you know a little bit about the mob from the Sicilian mob mainly, which is the one I kind of follow the most. But anyone, let us know and we'll do another episode. But thank you everybody for tuning in. Appreciate y'all very much. For George Batista, John Henry Soto, and all of us here at Counterparts, have a wonderful night. God bless you all. And as always, peace.